This telephone conversation is recorded and may be monitored by department staff. Thank you for using Global Tel-Link.
Well, what are you doing? I pushed the wrong button. Oh. What's going on? Oh, I just had to call you. Tell you. Had to, huh? No, yeah, I just had to. Because I wanted to tell you that, I believe in God and everything, right? And I have to confess my sins.
Welcome to a true crime special edition of the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vick, and I want to thank you for listening. While many of our episodes highlight various units and people at LSO, this episode will be a little bit different. We want to take you inside a real case worked by real LSO personnel. Today's episode will discuss the murder of Ann True and the subsequent investigation that followed. Some of what you are about to hear may be disturbing for some, and listener discretion is advised. Our hope with this and other true crime case reviews is to honor the victims and give a voice to their stories. We hope you'll enjoy this special episode of the 902 podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the 902 podcast. In studio today, we have Sheriff Terry Wagner, Chief Deputy Ben Houchin, and former Chief Deputy and former Lincoln Police Chief Jeff Bliemeister.
John, great to be here.
Hey, thanks for being here, Jeff. I'm John Vick, and we're here to talk a little bit about the Ann True homicide case. But before we get into that, Jeff, we wanted to hear a little bit about you. Obviously, we talked about a few of the positions that you've held here, but let's walk back. How did you get started in your law enforcement career?
Kind of an atypical career path. As I look back, never had any interest or desire to go into law enforcement. In fact, when I was at Nebraska Wesleyan University, I had aspirations of going to medical school. Following graduation, didn't get into medical school. I was working part-time at then Lincoln General Hospital as an autopsy assistant and phlebotomist, and that's when I was first introduced to a role in law enforcement. Met my wife then at the time and was made application to the sheriff's office, only law enforcement agency that I had made application to, and I was fortunate enough to receive an offer from Sheriff Wagner and Chief Deputy Jarrett.
Awesome. I'm guessing you started on the road like most of us do.
I did. Following graduation from Grand Island, my first assignment was as the Hickman contract deputy. And as the career progressed, different assignments mainly within patrol, and then I was fortunate enough to be promoted to sergeant. And shortly thereafter, spent a couple years on nights. Shortly after, received an opportunity to supervise the Criminal Investigations Division. And I did that for about 5 years. Moved around a little bit here at the sheriff's office in supervisory capacities. And then in 2012, received an appointment from Sheriff Wagner as Chief Deputy.
Right. So you served as Chief Deputy for, I think, 5 years here?
Yeah, from 2012 to 2016.
Okay.
And when I reflect back on this, I think about the appreciation that I have for Sheriff Wagner for first that job opportunity and two, the chance to serve as Chief Deputy. Had no intentions of leaving, loved it here. Late 2015 is when then Chief Jim Pashong for the Lincoln Police Department announced that he was going to be retiring, and myself, along with a whole host of other people, were asked to participate in the process and contemplated that and went through it and was humbled when I received an appointment as Chief of Police in April of 2016 and served there through 2021. And, as I was thinking about this and prepping for today, I think a lot about Sheriff Wagner in the fact that he has had two individuals that worked for him that were eventually chiefs of police. And for an agency of this size, I think it says a lot about Terry and the opportunities he provides for growth and development. And hopefully that's something you're proud of, Sheriff, and
Thank you.
Something you can look back on.
It is. Thank you.
So now we'll come back to your law enforcement career here at the sheriff's office in a minute as we get into this case. But you made a transition from police chief at Lincoln, and you stepped out of law enforcement. So tell us what you're doing with your life now.
I did. After 25 years, decided a change was appropriate. There was an opportunity that presented itself at Bryan Hospital. You know, I had worked for Lincoln General Hospital way back when, and that had been purchased by Bryan. And especially in my role as chief of police, I had a lot of interactions with Bryan Hospital. They were looking for a safety and security director, and I made application, and I'm there today. Excited to be there. It's a great organization. Still miss a lot of the people that I worked with here at the Sheriff's Office and the Lincoln Police Department. And, you know, law enforcement has a great purpose in this society, John, and it always will. And changes are always coming and on the horizon. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to work in law enforcement for 25 years.
Well, and I think it's pretty cool that you were able to kind of make that transition full circle back to kind of where you got your roots, but you also got to bring some of your training and experience with you back into the role that you're in now. So
I did. Yep. Those relationships are very impactful today, and something that I'm thankful that I had the chance to work on. Met so many purposeful people, and it's been fun.
Well, let's transition into a case that happened, and I'll let you set this up, Jeff. But this is a case I'm familiar with from hearing about it from people like you and Sheriff and Ben. But this happened about 10 years before I started. So why don't you kind of set this up for us? And we're working through a presentation that you've given many times, so I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you. Yep. I started in March of 1996, and so I was in field training when this actually occurred, when the remains were discovered in a rural area of Lancaster County, September 29th, 1996. And those remains were unidentified. And William Fabian, who was out running his dogs, the dogs alerted in a tree line. And when he approached, he found this. Probably his focus was on the human skull, because that's what was most apparent in these photographs. And at the time, and that's why when I look back and I think about how far law enforcement, especially in Lincoln and Lancaster County, has come, we didn't have dedicated crime scene technicians, but there was a partnership between the Sheriff's Office and the Police Department, something that it still exists today in the crime scene. They began processing the scene. While not dedicated technicians, they knew how to work through this, at least based upon the concepts at the time. Fast forward, the remains were brought for the pathologist to analyze, and they were able to provide an age and a height range and detailed analysis of that trauma.
Sheriff, as an agency head, what's going through your mind when you get a phone call, and maybe this was middle of the day, middle of the night, but that, you know, there's been some remains, a body that's been located in your county, and we don't know who it is. What?
Well, and I think this was the first homicide that occurred in Lancaster County after I took office.
Really? Okay.
So big deal.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big deal to have a homicide in the county. And then we're looking at just a daunting task of identifying the victim, and then how we're going to be able to solve this case. And so, yeah, it was a big deal. We brought all the resources we had to bear. Yeah, it took a while, but we got it done.
You know, the weird thing is before you can even start to try to solve it, you got to figure out who you have there. And, you know, that can always end up being a while to be able to get them identified, to even get started on the who did it. You know, you got to know who you have.
As Ben had said, we're literally looking, who is this, so we can start this investigation, because one, someone's loved one is out there. Based upon the analysis, they had been murdered. And two, who did this? And is that person still in our community and still impacting public safety? So Dr. Okoye at the time, he completes the autopsy. He identifies the cause of death as blunt force trauma, especially to the head and to the trunk. And when he did an analysis, there was some type of object that left a cylindrical injury to the skull itself. Ruled the manner of death as a homicide. And that's when we really began trying to use concepts that are so routine today. Entomology, trying to, hey, when was this body first placed out there? And Dr. Ratcliffe from the University of Nebraska, he says July 21st, 1996 to August 15th, 1996, somewhere in that time period. Then someone comes forward, the sister of Ann True, Vicki Sager. And she says, you know what? The general physical description that is being put out on the media through Sheriff Wagner and through the sheriff's office trying to identify who this is, I think that's my sister, Ann True. And we were fortunate at the time to have dental records for Ann that were compared by Dr. Luke Matranga up at Creighton, and they were found to be a match. So we identified, this is Ann True. And the investigators at the time that were assigned to this case, they really start the process of who was Ann. And so Ann was divorced. She had 6 children. She had battled some of the demons that society has throughout her lifetime. Originally, she had had some reports of being missing as far back as 1993, but she had really been living on the street, homeless at the time that she had been murdered, and didn't have a lot of established relationships. And, you know, today we have such a digital footprint that we begin many of the investigations on. That didn't exist. So we had to find out, okay, who did I interact with? Who were her friends, her support system? And because of her homeless status, that was pretty limited. Now we look at efforts by so many investigators at the sheriff's office and others to identify who took Ann's life continued for almost 8 years. The reality, there was lots of suspects, and every single one of them were exhausted in the leads, but really didn't have an idea of who took her life.
Now, Jeff, you remember we were in criminal together at that time, and our sheriff would come down and ask us some questions once in a while. What was that question you like to ask all the time, Sheriff?
Who killed Andrew?
Yeah, and for 8 years, we could never give him an answer.
Absolutely, and we're kind of thinking, we wish that we knew, because we wanted to provide closure to the family. And again, the same things that we talked about. There's still someone out there that took her life. And then we had a break.
We'll be right back.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
Welcome back to the 902 podcast. We'll pick it up where we left off with Jeff Bliemeister talking about a break that made all the difference in this case.
We had a break because of a partnership in law enforcement. And again, Sergeant Nord Cobb with the York Police Department had established a relationship with a couple in York. And Norm brings forward Angie Hecox. And Angie Hecox identifies during the initial phases of the interviews that were conducted by Ben and by Steve Eppins at the time. She identifies the killer as her ex-husband, Todd Baker. And now we really go down the path of, okay, why? What were the circumstances behind it? And Angela talks about how they began dating in 1995. And almost immediately after they began dating, they were traveling back from western Nebraska. And Angela stated that Todd had showed her what was human remains somewhere in a ditch in rural Lancaster County. Now, keep in mind that that did not match up with Ann True at the time, because even based upon the forensic exam from the entomology, we're thinking mid-1996 or later in 1996. But then Angela provides details that that was separate and distinct, and she was present when Todd abducted and murdered Ann True in 1996. She didn't feel safe, and this is just another example of the power and control of domestic violence until 2004 to come forward with some of those details.
So where was Angie at that point? Was she living here in Nebraska?
She was living, I believe at the time she was still, well, I can't remember for sure where she was living.
Okay.
She was living, when we started doing our interviews with her, down in Beatrice, and because we'd go down and pick her up and do
somewhere locally.
Yeah, she
Okay.
was, and she moved from York down to Beatrice at that time. So
Okay. All right.
But for young officers and deputies that are listening to this, think about how important it is for Sergeant Norm Cobb to develop that trust, something that's stressed by every agency head, and that allows Angela to come to him and then him to come forward. So,
Well, and how important it is for those relationships between departments as well, and to know a name and a face somewhere else so that when you get that information, you know what to do with it, where you can go with it.
somebody takes it seriously.
Right.
So the investigation really continues after this, and it is extensive. And I give so much credit to Ben and Steve Eppins and others that were in the investigative unit back then. And what is described by Angie Hecox is that June or July of 1996, that she and Todd were driving around the area of 48th and Hartley, that Baker saw a female walking down the sidewalk, and he kind of began to exhibit these behaviors of anger. He ordered Angie into the back seat of the Monte Carlo that they were driving, and he exits. She hears what she thinks is a few knocks at the time. He opens up the passenger side. Remember, she's in the back seat of this two-door vehicle, and what she remembers is, and provides a very detailed description, is the shoes, the white tennis shoes and the markings on that, because as she describes, this person is head down on the passenger side of the vehicle.
her head was on the floorboard and her feet were up.
So Todd Baker is with Angie. They're driving around and steps out of the car. Next thing that Angie knows is that somebody's coming into the car and basically being dumped in that front seat. Am I picturing that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then she provides more details about this person is alive at the time. The person is asking why. Why is this happening? And some gurgling sounds. And then Angie recounts details of driving to a rural area, that Todd drags the female from the car, and that he comes back and he has a hammer with blood and hair on it. And when she provides these descriptions, John, this is when, you know what, even though it was so belated, that matches up with the injuries that had been reported during the analysis of the autopsy.
And one other thing that's really important is a lot of that information wasn't out in the public. And so that helped us be able to verify that she knew and saw what that was, because it wasn't out there. And that's the reason why a lot of times I know people out in the public go, well, how can the police not know that? Well, it may not be that we don't know it. It's more that we need to keep that in, so when we have somebody come and talk about it, we can help verify that situation.
I'm glad you said that. I think that's important for people to understand, because I know that citizens and even those in the media sometimes get frustrated when they're asking questions that they may think that we have the answer to. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but we may have very good reasons for why we're not disclosing that information.
Hold back details to provide legitimacy to anybody that might come forward. It's important.
Very.
So Angie further describes, efforts by Todd Baker to clean up this car. And so we have a lot of details, but it's so belated that we're trying to look for ways to corroborate that. And then Angela tells the fact that after this occurs, her and Todd get married, and that kind of just defies common logic, right? And then it provides an element of skepticism of, is everything that she's telling us true?
Sometimes the truth is more unbelievable than fiction can possibly be on some of these situations.
And so we have investigators with Angie in the room at this point, right? Was that you? Who was it? Steve? Okay.
That was Steve Eppens and Ben at the time.
Okay.
And it wasn't until a little bit later in this process where I become more intimately involved.
Sure. So, Ben, what?
Because I was the sergeant at that time in criminal when this initially broke.
Ben, you're hearing this from Angie. The sheriff's been asking you for 8 years who killed Ann True. What's going through your mind when you're hearing some of these details that we've previously withheld from the public, and all of a sudden they're coming out in an interview room?
We might be getting close, is what I'm thinking. And like I said, and then Jeff will go through some of this, but we were having a hard time really being able to prove it because some of the evidence and things we did not have. So I ended up doing a polygraph exam on Angie just to help verify that, just to give it a little bit more teeth that, hey, she's right on and we got something going here.
So maybe talk about that evidence a little bit, Jeff.
Angie describes the car. We're able to verify, yep, Todd Baker had a 1981 Chevy Monte Carlo at the time. But I can't tell you how many salvage yards, John, that we searched for that vehicle. No luck. He had described how, or Angie had described how Todd had dumped the purse of Ann True in a dumpster, and pretty specifics on that. And we went back and tried to find any evidence that she'd ever been issued an ID or something. Nothing could be found. She describes the hammer, kind of where the hammer was thrown out.
Yes.
I remember looking through all of the different found article property reports from the sheriff's office, from the Lincoln Police Department, trying to find some corroboration.
But the big thing with that is a hammer matched the injuries that Ann sustained, especially to her skull. So that helped a little bit on the verification of that.
It absolutely did. And then, as part of these detailed interviews, Angie Hecox is coming forward with the details where she describes the body that had been shown to her in 1995 and talks about some other individuals that she believed that Todd Baker had taken their life. And she goes into this fixation that Baker had on hammers. So we're trying all of these different angles in addition to the polygraph itself, trying to determine, is there legitimacy to what she's saying? There certainly is, because she's describing these shoes. She's describing the method that was used. But we need more than that to be able to hold Todd Baker accountable. So did some background, a lot of background on Todd Baker. Who was he? Some of the things that stand out, May of 1982, he was arrested while a member of the United States Army in California for 2 counts of kidnapping. He was sentenced to 5 years in the California Youth Authority at the time. 1985, he was serving a sentence on a theft conviction, and he was convicted of escape with that, 2 years probation. But other than those 2 things, the significance of his criminal record really wasn't there.
There wasn't a whole lot of violence. I mean, the kidnapping's one thing, but I mean, it wasn't to the point that there are assaults and doing those things kind of what he ended up doing to his victims.
And this was such a heinous encounter as described by Angela. And so we're looking for all of those things and thinking, how can it be that someone like this, with this predisposition towards extreme violence and random violence, be living out there and not doing other things? Well, we do some research. We find out that he is living in Deltona, Florida with his 5th wife at the time. And at that phase is kind of when I started becoming involved, and we were corresponding with the Major Crimes Unit down in Volusia County, Florida. Steve Eppens, again, leading this investigation. And there's plans that are developed to go down there and try to contact Todd, because we really had exhausted every other investigative approach. Ben had completed a polygraph. She passed the polygraph, but there was no physical evidence.
We couldn't get her to be able to contact Todd because she did not have any ability to know how to do that, and it would have looked pretty hinky if out of the blue she would have made a phone call or anything of that nature.
It was, and that relationship wasn't good any
not
longer
at all.
either.
And did we have any contacts with Volusia County, or how did that get started? Did we just have to kind of reach out and cold call?
Cold call.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
And that's another great part of this particular incident is that they dropped everything. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because Steve Eppins and I, we fly down to Florida February 28th of 2005, and we're just going to try to talk to him, see what we can find out.
Wow.
So when we first get down there, we're coordinating with Volusia County. We're giving their major crimes investigators all of this background information that we have. We're doing some attempts to just see what he's doing. And despite trying to remain inconspicuous, he picks up on the fact that there's people that are watching him and kind of exhibits some paranoid behavior. But again, this homicide was a long time ago. He has no idea that investigators from Lincoln, Nebraska have traveled to Florida, and it could have been for a variety of different things.
Well, yeah, like you said, as we may not even know, he may have been thinking it's something else that he's done that we don't know about, that he's being more paranoid about too.
Absolutely. So we've exhausted our attempts to try to contact him, and we, by intent, had not contacted him or his current wife, Carmella Baker. But Steve Eppins and I can vividly recall it. We go to his dad's house, March 3rd, 2005, and we're trying to talk to his dad about, this is what we know. We believe your son murdered someone in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1996. And the disbelief, as most would anticipate, was there. So in the midst of all of this, no luck in talking to Todd himself, we drive to his current wife's employer, which is a short distance away in Castleberry, and we attempt to interview on her, and repetitively, this is not the Todd Baker I know. I do not believe you. And we're providing the photos and talking about how we got there. Very candid in the approach. Her belief in Todd allowed us an opportunity, an opening that we were somewhat unprepared for then. We made the decision to say, you know what? Will you call him up? Ask him these questions. Ask him if he didn't. And she was so adamant in her support of Todd that she was willing to do it. But we had a handheld recorder and a phone. We did the best we could.
Well, we'll play that call right now.
I want to know what is going on, and I want you to tell me the truth.
Well, they're going to probably take me from getting fucking life insurance. What's going on, Carmella? That's what they want to do.
They told me about this Ann True, and they told me that she was murdered and that you did it. Did you kill her, Todd?
Carmella, where are you at?
I'm in the conference room. This is the only place where I can call you back where people were going to listen.
Can you listen to me? Okay.
Yes, I'll listen to you.
Well, I can. Just listen for a minute to hear what I say to you. Okay?
Yes?
You were at the beginning full of brand thing. And I loved you so much.
Then tell me the truth.
And they're gonna try me.
Todd.
That's the way it is. And I'm so sorry that we weren't together earlier.
Todd. I came all the way down to... No, you're going to listen to me. I love you. I've loved you since I met you, and you know that, but you got to tell me what happened.
You know, I'm so sorry, baby. I really am. called it over or anything?
No, I haven't.
Because, you know, they're going to take me up there. Okay?
Why would they take you up there?
Because they can. All right?
Todd, did
And they will.
you do what they're telling me that you did? Because that is not the Todd Baker that I know.
I know it. I know it. And that's who you have to love. Okay?
No, you
All
need
right.
to tell. Have you always? But you've always been that way. Did you do this to this person or not? I deserve the truth. I deserve at least that.
Oh.
I need to know that. I deserve to know that. You owe me that at least.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, what?
Yes. Because I love you, yes. Okay? And I'm so sorry I love you. Okay?
Wow, how good did that feel when you got that out?
Yeah, and sitting in that conference room with Carmella, whose life was just turned upside down by this whole thing, again, genuinely did not know this part of Todd Baker. And her cooperation, her persistence lent towards his confession in that manner. That, coupled with the statements we had already received from Angela Hecox, was enough. And so the process began with Jeff Mathers and Joe Kelly at the time of filing an arrest warrant back here in Lancaster County for the murder that occurred in 1996. And so now Todd knows we're looking for him. And there are efforts that continue after this from us and from Carmella, trying just to get him to turn himself in. And it wasn't successful. And there are many units down there, or divisions and agencies, I guess. They're looking for him because we're worried about him harming himself or him harming others. And so it was at that time that we found his vehicle abandoned near a church. And then about 3 hours after that, he was located at his dad's place where we had been prior that day.
So there's got to be some relief from an investigator perspective, though, that you're living out of a suitcase, not really knowing whether this lead is going to turn into something or not. You think you've got a pretty good guess and a pretty good evidence when you're going down there. Otherwise, we wouldn't put you on a plane. But you still have to have some information to get home. So what was that like for you, hearing that call in that conference room?
Knowing, as soon as we heard that, so his affirmation that we had what we needed, especially when those days preceding it down there, myself and Steve Eppins, and then our reports back to everybody here, including Sheriff Wagner, there wasn't a lot of confidence that we were going to be able to get some culpability for Todd. But that provided that finality, and really it began this process of, oh my goodness, the things that Angela told us are true. What about all these other people that Todd had allegedly taken their lives? And the cooperation, Volusia County Major Crimes Unit, my goodness, they couldn't have been more helpful. In the days to follow, we would serve search warrants at Todd's residence, and we're looking for because the crime, that was 8 years prior to this. We're looking for, is there any memorabilia, any newspaper clippings, things like that that would show that he had an interest. And the reality is we found none of that. But there was a audio recording on the answering machine at the time that provided some additional perspective and corroboration.
You know, it certainly was a roll of the dice going down there and trying to get an interview on him, and the phone call that his wife made. And it was either going to work or it was going to blow up in your guys' face, and it wasn't going to work. But, you know, thankfully it turned out the way it did. And sometimes, and I think you'll agree, you get to a point where you got to make something happen, and you make a decision and hope for the best at that point in time.
So you're serving a search warrant at a residence, and you find an answering machine.
Yep. We had secured the residence right away following his arrest, making sure nobody comes in and out, and serve it the next day. And you see, you know, for those of you that haven't seen an answer machine, because it's kind of
we used to have those.
It's a legacy technology for certain, but it's flashing on there. And the warrant covered that, and we hit play.
This is me. I'm just going to talk first. As long as the machine will let me talk. I'm on my way to a church. I'm going to go tell Laura I'm so sorry. Maybe he'll take pity on me. I'm so sorry for people I've hurt. I'm so sorry for the people that are hurting now. I will for a while. But I'm going to end my stuff here because I've been hurting and hating myself and wondering why I was left alone, I guess. I don't know. Why I'm think the things I think and do the things I've done. But I can't lie anymore. I won't lie. So, Jimmy's got some things for you, Carmella. Please call your family. Goodbye.
So after that, of course, attempts were made to talk with Todd, and he wasn't receptive to that. And I think an important point, or a finer point of the law at the time, is that he just refuses to talk. He never asked for counsel, and that becomes important later on. So at 2005, we're coming back. We're going through the extradition process, and the arrest becomes public, right? And so a photo is one of the lead articles in the Lincoln Journal-Star at the time. And there's a community member that sees Todd Baker's photo and eventually comes forward. She positively IDs Todd as being responsible for choking, attempting to sexually assault her to the point that she became unconscious at Folsom and West A back in October of 1997. So that would have been after the homicide of Ann True, after these human remains that have yet to be identified or found in the ditch in rural Lancaster County in 1995. But this individual's willingness to come forward becomes very important once we go to trial. The statute of limitations at the time was 7 years for sexual assault, and that had passed. But she had provided sketches of the perpetrator, and we were able to obtain those from the Lincoln Police Department property unit, because that was investigated by the Lincoln Police Department at the time. And while all the other evidence had been purged because the statute of limitations had expired, which for those that know about DNA technology and the potential and how things have improved since then, It was important, but we didn't have it. And so we looked at the sketches, remarkably similar to Todd Baker and proximate to where Todd's mother was living on South Folsom, basically 4 blocks away from the assault that she was describing in 1997. So then we began to prep for trial. And this takes some time, right? The extradition process takes time. Todd is now represented by the public defender's office. We continue so many ways to locate these additional remains that had been described by Angela Hecox because of the importance that would provide at trial. In fact, we did excavations of grave sites that were identified by cadaver dogs at the time. No luck. And we do find prior to trial evidence that had previously not been found. And today, the sheriff's office and law enforcement in general, the evidentiary processes are so much better than they were
Absolutely,
back then. Yeah. And that's something we had to own. We had to own that as an agency because we find the shoes. We find DNA, fingernail scrapings and things like that that were originally found during the autopsy of Ann True, but we couldn't locate.
Correct.
And it was in an uncontrolled environment, secured but uncontrolled, and really had no relevance in the court process. It didn't provide any additional physical corroboration. But the shoes?
The shoes did, yes.
They did. The shoes were exactly what Angie Hecox described, and they were unique enough to where you had to have intimate knowledge to know about that. So we did the due diligence. We find this property in this uncontrolled environment, and it's a mess. It really is. I know myself, the sheriff, all of us at the sheriff's office wish we would have done a different job back then, but we didn't. And we go to trial in September of 2006, and that trial is led by Jeff Mathers, who still works at the county attorney's office, and Joe Kelly, who was the elected county attorney at the time. Excuse me, he was not the elected county attorney at that time, later on, but now is the lieutenant governor for the state of Nebraska. Angie Hecox, Carmella Baker both testify. Their testimony is impactful, but as you can imagine, based upon the story that's been described, a lot of it is attacked, right? Because we have these statements coupled with some pretty outlandish claims by Angela Hecox. And then we have Carmella and the corroboration of that controlled call, that phone call that we listened to. But when I look back on this, I think about that citizen who came forward, who had no reason to come forward. It's not going to help her case. But her testimony was allowed. It's called Rule 404 evidence. And Joe and Jeff Mathers did a great job of getting that introduced. And he takes the stand. He denies any responsibility, Todd Baker does. But ultimately, he is convicted of first-degree murder. Immediately, his counsel, as anticipated, file an appeal. And we kind of take a holding pattern at the time, trying to determine who are these other human remains. And, we're just kind of waiting. And in the interim, Baker is at the Diagnostic and Evaluation Center. Every single outgoing call is recorded at the time. We know this. We're listening to this. He knows this. It's no secret.
Yeah, it says it right there before you start talking that this is recorded.
Right. And then there's some pretty big changes that occur on a phone call that's made late one night, January 20th of 2007.
This telephone conversation is recorded and may be monitored by department staff. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Well, what are you doing? I pushed the wrong button. Oh, what's going on? Oh, I just had to call you. Tell you. Had to, huh? No, yeah, I just had to. Because I wanted to tell you that, I believe in God and everything, right? And I had to confess my sins in order to make it to my salvation. guys already pretty much know anyway. I figured, living in a fantasy world is not that I did that crime, Angela and me did. You what? Did the crime. Angela and me did. Together. Well, I'm sorry, I don't know why. I can't explain it. Yeah, take these damn phone calls. Well, I'm going to tell them on Monday anyway. I tried to call them already Friday. I wouldn't even bother. Oh, but there's another one out there, and I have to clear it up, too. And that's the reason that I said I had to call you and tell you. Yeah, you better not. I didn't want you to find out any other way. Yeah, you better not. You better not do that. They're going to take you back to court then. Well, that's the way it goes. But see, this is the whole deal. If I don't, then that's coveting something that somebody else needs, you know what I mean? I'm keeping it from them. Besides that other person, she needs to go home, You know what I mean? The other person needs to go home. Yeah. To her family. Wouldn't you want that if that was your child out there? Yeah.
So, you hear firsthand Todd, for the first time, accepting responsibility for the murder of Ann True, talking about he and Angela did that, but then telling his dad about another one being out there, and she needs to go home, and citing some of these biblical references that he is. And it's one of those things that at the time we had suspicions. Sergeant Luke Wilkie, who had become intimately involved in this investigation, we had suspicions of who this may be. And this was an opportunity. And if you recall back, I talked about how at the time, back in 2005, how Todd never invoked the right to counsel because he had remained in custody since that time. And it's kind of a finer point of the law, but we were able to go out to the D&E right after this. And Todd helped us through. Todd participated, at least for a few days, in trying to find this individual that he is referencing.
And we'll talk about that in a future episode of the 902 podcast. But Jeff, just really want to thank you for your time today, recapping the investigation and ultimate conviction for Ann True's murderer. But just, thank you for all the work that you did on the case, but also just walking us back through the steps that you and many others at the sheriff's office and countless other agencies took. So, Sheriff, final thoughts?
That was kind of a whirlwind when these guys went to Florida and hit the ground running there. And at one point they had a school locked down because they were looking for Baker. And I talked with the sheriff down there and thanked him for his help. But it was, I knew they didn't have much personal belongings with them, like clothes and toothbrushes and whatever else you need when you travel. And it kept getting extended. And just a great job of sticking with it and getting making the case.
It's so funny looking back now, 05 and now in 2023, the way we investigate and do those things has changed so considerably. Now, you still get the interviews and you still do these things, but there's a lot more technology and evidence collection that way that would probably have helped a lot during that time period.
Absolutely.
And our DNA has also improved greatly, but our ability on smartphones and doing that part has changed the game on investigations at this point.
And the way we handle evidence, I think it.
Oh, yes.
Immediately after this case, we revised our evidence handling procedures, and that was an eye opener. It was kind of shaming that we handled property that way back then.
But we live and learn. Jeff, like you said, sometimes we've got to own stuff. It's a big part of the reason that we're doing this podcast. We want to be transparent with citizens in our community, let them know a little bit about why we do what we do and how we do it. But really just want to thank you again so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, but we appreciate you joining us and coming back to the sheriff's office to talk and relive a little bit of your time here.
John, it feels like home. Thank you for the opportunity. And I agree with you. You opening the doors to the sheriff's office, to the sheriff and Ben and all of you, and describing, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. Come find out more about us. Good job.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this special true crime edition of the 902 podcast. We will be uploading supplemental materials and photographs to our Facebook page, which you can find by searching @LSO Nebraska. We also have social media accounts where you can interact with us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We look forward to bringing you a future episode for part 2 of the Todd Baker story. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe and follow for future updates and share the 902 podcast with other listeners. If you're interested in learning more about careers at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, be sure to visit joinlso.com, and we hope to catch you on a future episode of the 902 podcast. Thanks for listening.